Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about, excuse me, we just talked about that Big Ten, Big Noon controversy that is kind of sweeping around the Big Ten right about now. I'm sure it's something that will likely be yelled about for quite some time, and I'll leave it at that for the time being. We'll update you if there's any good updates to be had there, but let's get into some big game picks, and I think that Oregon-Wisconsin game, it is the biggest game in the Big Ten this week, and it is at night, so that's the good news for Big Ten fans out there, but the not good news is that is your best game of the week. So another example of why you got some work to do. Let's just put it that way with some of the teams in that conference. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a really interesting game. And then Mizzou, South Carolina is just one that could have all the implications in the world, could not mean anything at the end of the day. But we'll get to that here in a second. Let's start with that Oregon-Wisconsin game over there in Camp Randall. And this is a very, very interesting one. It could outright send Oregon to the Big Ten championship. They win this one, they can still afford a loss in that last game of the year against Washington. They don't want to lose that game for obvious reasons, but at the end of the day, they can afford a loss there and still find their way to Indy. So a win here gets them into Indy, probably sets them up for a rematch, maybe against Ohio State. Maybe they'll get Indiana for the first time this year, depending on what happens in that game next week. But it is a really interesting one. This is the third time that they have gone on the road to a new Big Ten stadium. First time was a Friday night in West Lafayette. We tried to make that one interesting. It wasn't quite as interesting as we wanted it to be. Then it was over to the Big House, and there was a minor scare before a just downright ridiculous fourth down call near the goal line. There was a little bit of a scare there in the Big House for Oregon this year, but Camp Randall on a Saturday night is going to be different. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch what this Oregon team has, and they've been laser focused all year, so I'm not super worried about them, but it definitely will be a factor in this game. And for Wisconsin, you got to rely on your run game. And as crazy as that sounds, because Oregon is only 2 positions behind Iowa that absolutely stifled you last week, but the reality is you're not beating this team when it's just Braden Locke, when it's just this past game trying to go punch for punch with Dylan Gabriel. I can almost promise you that it is not going to go very beautifully. But I do think Oregon's game plan will be relatively similar. Wisconsin's pass defense is one of the best in the country. They have gotten a couple of different games, including that USC one against Miller Moss, so maybe something to watch. Maybe there's a couple more openings than it seems to be on paper. But at the end of the day, I do think Oregon's going to try to run the ball in this game. They got Jordan James going. Noah Whittington had a great week last week, and we'll talk about him here in a second, but that's the reality. I do think this is going to be a game that one way or another is one on the ground, and I think for Wisconsin, you're really just looking for a spark plug for this program. It's felt like this program has been kind of in the mud this year. They've been able to play some good football at times. They got the injury to Tyler Van Dyke early on in the year that put him in a weird place. Ches Malusi goes down and puts him in another weird place. So they've had a lot of tough stuff to overcome, but the reality is they got to have that one moment. Luke Fickell is losing a lot of these fans. He's losing a lot of that energy in that fan base, and if he can win this one, it's all right back to normal, and then you can really attack 2025. But if they lose and possibly lose out, they're in a really, really tough position going forward. But for Oregon, it's just about, sealing the fate that you started in week 1, doing everything that you've wanted to do really from when you got the news that you were joining the Big Ten. It was always, we want to win it in year 1. This would be a step towards that. So can the desperation help Wisconsin get this huge win, or will Oregon just kind of continue that death march that they've been on? But to do that, I think Noah Whittington's going to have a huge game. He is a huge player for this team, had a great game last week, and he's one of those guys that just totally opens up this offense. They are so dangerous down the field passing the ball with Evan Stewart coming on and Tez Johnson and all of the different wide receivers they have. This is a kid that is so dangerous out of the backfield, and while you're worrying about even Jordan James over him, he can still make all the plays in the world. So I think he's one of those guys that has kind of been a little bit of an unsung player for them, but in the return game, in the run game, he's going to be huge, and he could just make that one huge play in this one to kind of silence that crowd. Then you got Jordan Burch, and this is someone that obviously Dan Lanning trusts a lot. He had that little fake punt last week, and if that's going to happen again, it probably will be Jordan Burch again, because that dude flew downfield. He is so athletic. He is such an incredible athlete that it's one of those players that you really just got to put in the right situations. You really just got to give him that one-on-one on the outside. You got to give him that one chance to make that big-time play. He usually makes it. He's a really remarkable player, and ever since he's come over to Oregon, has become more and more of that incredible player that he's been capable of being really his entire career. And then CJ Williams on the other side, I stand pat in thinking that this is your best physical matchup when you play these elite teams across the country. He's about 6'3", over 200 pounds, a very physical receiver. And when you have guys like Jabbar Muhammad on the other side, you need someone that can just physically match up. You have players on this team. You have Will Pauling. You have a lot of guys that can make plays. This is the guy that can just go up through one of these defenders and make a big-time play. That is who he is, and he's definitely someone that I think if Wisconsin's going to get it done, they got to make some plays through the pass game. It can't just be the run game, especially because you're going up against one of the best run defenses in the country. So you're fighting a battle here, one way or the other, but I think this is a physical guy that could go up and make that one play that totally changes this game for Wisconsin. And then you got Preston Zachman on the back end of that defense, and along with Hunter Wohler, and those guys are huge in this game. The safeties, whether it's in run support or just roving the back end, trying to make that one big play, they are absolutely massive. They need to get turnovers. They need to get big plays, and that back end, is very, very talented and has every ability to get a couple of those big-time plays that they're going to need, but it starts with Zachman, it starts with Hunter Wohler, and then everyone else got to hold their weight as well. It's a huge challenge, but those two veteran safeties in the middle make that a little bit easier, that's for sure. But some keys to the game. Can Braden Locke step up to the plate? Can he be up for the challenge in this one? Because he's going to have to make plays one way or another. Wisconsin does need their run game to lead the way. I don't think they win this game if their run game cannot get going. But Braden Locke also probably has to have his best game of the year, just plain and period. He probably does have to be kind of slinging the rock around, making a couple of big-time plays, and is he up for that, especially with an elite defensive line on the other side? Is he up for that? Can his offensive line give him enough time to even be up for that challenge? So that's going to be interesting to watch. And then Oregon at Camp Randall is always going to be interesting. This is the first time they've gone on the road at night to anyone not named Purdue. So I think it's going to be a very interesting game, and one of those that maybe this is where you get to them just a little bit. Maybe this is where their confidence and their focus and everything kind of lapses just for a little bit, and Wisconsin has that opening. It's going to be tough, but Camp Randall can definitely help you out on the way there. And then we talked about it. That Wisconsin O-line against this Oregon D-line, it's going to be huge. From pass pro to run blocking, they got to win the line of scrimmage one way or the other, or at least hold even. They can't get absolutely dominated, kind of in the way that Ohio State did at different points in that game. That cannot happen for Wisconsin. They have to be able to hold up. It is going to be a Herculean task. Let's just be totally honest. That is one of the best defensive lines in the country, but they're just going to have to do it one way or another if they're going to want to get this win. And frankly, I think it's going to be really tough to get the win. I do think this is going to be a little bit closer. I think Wisconsin has a little bit of guts. I think their back is up against the wall just a little bit here, and I think they're going to respond pretty well. I don't think they're going to get this win. I think Oregon's going to be able to get it, and maybe Wisconsin gets a late touchdown to make it look a little bit nicer than it will be, but at the end of the day, I do think it'll be a fun one, and I think Wisconsin's a little bit more of a live dog than some people are giving them credit for. But moving on to another game that is as confusing as just about anyone on the board, which is Missouri going to South Carolina for a huge one this weekend. And it's a really interesting matchup that could have tons of consequences or none at all. And the reality is, if Missouri were to win out, they could not be in. If South Carolina were to win out, they could not even be close to be in. And I would be very surprised if they were in the CFP if they win out. That talk has been going around. It's probably not happening, but it could affect some others in this conference, and that's kind of the crazy part about it, where you have a position where if Missouri were to lose 2 out of the next 3, if they were to lose this weekend and then say lose to Arkansas at the end of the year, LSU were to win out, Alabama were to win out, and Georgia were to win this weekend, LSU would go to the SEC championship. So the reality is LSU is a big South Carolina team this weekend. If they can get this win, it puts Missouri on a little bit of a tough path, and then you continue moving forward. You see if you can get those wins, and then maybe it's LSU that ends up getting a chance at Atlanta. That sounds crazy, but it would start this weekend. If Missouri wins this game, then I believe any chance LSU has is officially out the window. But definitely will be interesting to watch, and South Carolina is favored in this game. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold. And really, for South Carolina, I think the biggest thing here is you got to send a message. That's the job this weekend, and really the job for the rest of the year, including that Clemson game. You got to win by a lot. You got to win by 21 points. You got to win by 20 next week. You got to win by 20 against Clemson. It's got to be really convincing. And it's got to be absolutely slap you in the face impressive in these games, because the reality is you're going to be 9-3 at best, and you're going to be in a position where you have a lot of 10-2 teams in your conference that are going to be above you. I do think there are a couple of teams in there that they could jump at 9-3, like say a 10-2 Texas. I think they could. You could easily argue to me that South Carolina would deserve to be above them. But at the end of the day, there's not quite too many around there. You have Alabama. You lost to them. You could have LSU. You lost to them. You have a couple of other teams that you could have Ole Miss. You lost to them. So you're in a really tough position. So it's about just really proving a point, really showing that you are one of the best teams in the country. I'd be shocked if they can do it, but this weekend is where it starts. And then Missouri's in the exact same place because I think a lot of people, including myself, and I bet a lot of people in that room, have already kind of written off Missouri. And it's not to say that they don't have a shot to make the CFP, but let's be totally honest. They really need to put on a show the next couple of weeks. They need to prove that they would be outright better than a 10-2 Tennessee, let's just say, or a 10-2 Ole Miss. They need to prove that, and they have not at all recently. So definitely something to watch. Will Brady Cook be able to go is a big-time question, because if he does, I think this game changes in a hurry. The thing is, it sounds like Drew Pine is preparing as the starter, and I expect him to be the starter this upcoming weekend. He's coming off a solid game from Oklahoma, but this is a defensive line that's going to get after him pretty quickly, and it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of handles that. But this is going to be an interesting game to watch because we just don't know what the implications are. If South Carolina wins, we know it helps out LSU, but LSU still got to handle their business. So if they lose, then it won't matter at all, really. If Missouri were to win out, maybe they get in, and maybe craziness happens above them. But at the end of the day, you're looking at this game, and it looks like a really big ranked matchup, and maybe at the end of the day, it's blip on the radar, but it could be a huge game, so it's kind of a fun one to break down. But players to watch, I think Marcus Carroll for Missouri is huge in this game. You know that you don't have the quarterback, you know you don't have necessarily the quarterback run game that you would have with Brady Cook. It's got to be these running backs. It's got to be Marcus Carroll, it's got to be Nate Noel, and Marcus Carroll is the guy that can kind of abuse some people when he's running through holes, and I think he's going to be huge in this game just to get a little bit of that wear-down effect on the South Carolina defense. That's probably the only way you're going to be able to slow down this defensive front. And then the linebacker, Tristan Newsome, I think is massive. He had a sack and 2.5 tackles for loss last week, and I think he's one of those players that just totally makes everything on that defense just go. It makes it so much easier to handle everything that's thrown at you. And you look at the South Carolina run game, it's all about misdirection. It's all about Lenore Sellers making that one read and then getting out on the edge. You're going to be chasing that guy a lot on Saturday, and you're going to have to make a couple of plays in open field, and even against this guy. And he's really hard to get down. Rocket Sanders is one of the most physical running backs in the entire SEC, really in the entire country, and him along with Lenore Sellers has made for one of the most lethal running attacks in the entire country this year. So Missouri has a huge challenge in front of them. If they let Rocket Sanders get going, it's going to be a really long day at the office for the Tigers. And then you got Tonka Hemingway in the middle of that defense for South Carolina. I think he's a guy that is just so athletic. He's so versatile. He can do so many different things. He can rush the passer. But at the end of the day, I think the job for him is just to run stop on Saturday. I think if you're South Carolina and you can say, without a doubt, we can stop the run no matter what, you're going to win this football game. There's no way that Drew Pine's going to go out there and outright win a football game in South Carolina Stadium. That's just not going to happen. So if you're able to stop the run with Tonka Hemingway and a lot of these defensive tackles, you're going to have a lot of success, especially when you can drop guys back into coverage, because that's when Nick Emenwari or Kilgore or some of these players on the back end make that big-time play and totally change this one. But some keys to this game. Missouri's pass pro has to be perfect, just plain simple. It has to be perfect. These pass rushers for South Carolina are just too talented. They're just too scary, and especially with your backup quarterback, if you're going to allow him to get home a couple of times, this one's going to get ugly. It's going to get ugly exactly like that A&M game got ugly, and maybe even worse than that one. So you're going to have to be careful in this one, and I think Missouri's in a position where they just got to the O-line's got to play otherworldly, really, on Saturday. And then Lenore Sellers' magic. It is special. Watching this kid right now is so much fun to watch. He has over 200 yards passing in back-to-back games, had 100 yards rushing against A&M, had, I believe, 3 touchdowns last week, 4 against A&M. He's been remarkable. Really, since he's returned from that injury, he's been absolutely incredible, and he's one of those guys that, as South Carolina tries and claws to make a case for the CFP, he's going to be at the very center of it, and he might just put on another show in Williams-Brice Stadium, and that's the last key to this game, because This is one of the best atmospheres in the entire college football world when it is at night and when all of these fans are fully engaged, and they very much will be on Saturday. It is going to be absolutely crazy, and I can't imagine Drew Pyne's going to be fully ready for that atmosphere that's going to be thrown at them. And frankly, I think this one's going to get ugly. I think South Carolina's offense is absolutely humming right now. I think Missouri's offense is one of those things where you're going to be able to make a couple of plays. Luther Burden is a very talented player, Mookie Cooper as well. Theo Weiss had a great game last week, but at the end of the day, that defensive line is going to get home a couple of times. Missouri's just not going to have the guys to counter them, especially on defense, and I think South Carolina gets a big-time win here. I think Missouri continues to skid, and this talk around them possibly making the playoff will finally be put to bed. So I do think South Carolina wins that game. I think Oregon barely wins that game against Wisconsin. I think that one's going to be really, really interesting at the end of the week. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we got a couple of Big 12 games I want to break down for you. We have one little upset alert with Utah at Colorado, and then Arizona State, Kansas State is an outright elimination game in the Big 12, and we'll break it down right after this.